Chapter 11, Time in Anhui. The next day marked the beginning of their journey to Anhui, the chosen venue for the Roaring Tiger tournament. Anticipation hung in the air as Lao Shi and his disciples prepared for the road ahead. Over the 2-day journey, they maintained their discipline with brief training sessions each morning and afternoon, ensuring they remained sharp for the challenges to come. The tournament was set to take place in the city of Nanjing, which straddled the majestic banks of the Yangtze River. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the bustling activity of spectators and participants alike, all converging on the city for the grand event. It was immediately apparent that this tournament was on a far grander scale than the one Lang had competed in back in Hubei. The sheer volume of attendees dwarfed their previous experiences. Amidst the sea of unfamiliar faces, one in particular caught Lao Shi's attention, a woman from the hunter sect whose actions he could never forget. She was the same one who had once unceremoniously flung him, cage and all, into the forest. His fist tightened involuntarily, and a dark smirk crossed his face at the memory. The prospect of retribution loomed near, yet Lao Shi's sense of responsibility prevailed. His immediate concern was securing accommodations for his disciples, and he used the prestige of the Jin family name and insignia to secure lodgings at a reputable inn. Later, he murmured to himself, eyes following the woman as she melded back into the throng of people. Nanjing, nestled along the grand currents of the Yangtze River, stood as a beacon of martial prowess and cultural vibrancy. The city, alive with preparations for the Roaring Tiger tournament, hummed with the energy of anticipation. Streets wound like serpents between buildings adorned with brightly colored shingles that gleamed under the sun, their wooden arches and intricate carvings speaking to the skill and reverence of their craftsmen. The inn Lao Shi selected for his disciples was an elegant structure steeped in tradition. Its wooden facade, polished to a warm sheen, welcomed them with the promise of rest and refuge. Inside, the air was cool and scented with pine. The interior courtyard boasted a tranquil pond where koi fish swam beneath lotus leaves, a quiet contrast to the bustling streets outside. Dinner was an affair that mirrored the grandeur of Nanjing itself. The dining hall was spacious, filled with the clatter of chopsticks and the murmur of voices. Tables were laden with the bounty of the region, braised meats that fell apart at the touch, vegetables fresh from the fields, and rice wine that caught the light in its cups. Ensure you rest well tonight, for tomorrow demands every ounce of your strength, Lao Shi advised his disciples with a warm smile. I'm set to claim victory this time, Lang boasted with a confident smirk. In your dreams, I'll easily outmatch you, retorted Ye, his voice as cool as his smile, even as he selected a piece of meat from the lavish spread before them. And I refuse to be left in the dust by either of you, Chow chimed in assertively, pausing from her soup to join the friendly banter. We'll also put forth our best effort, Tao added, his tone slightly less assured than his companions while Jiang affirmed with a supportive nod. To that, I'll gladly drink, Lao Shi declared, his laughter filling the room as he poured himself another serving of sake. Master, that's your third bottle. Are you sure that's wise? Chow inquired, her concern veiled by a tentative smile. Nonsense. I could outdrink an army if challenged, Lao Shi boasted, slapping his stomach. As the evening wound down and his disciples retreated to their rooms, Lao Shi ventured into the night, maintaining his human guise. His silver hair fluttered in the night breeze, with Jiu, ever loyal, perched comfortably on his shoulder. You should seek rest as well, Jiu, he suggested, gently stroking her head. Not tired, she protested lightly, settling in more snugly on his shoulder. She was way bigger than the sparrow size she used to be. She fattened up and her wingspan also grew considerably, now standing as the size of a bigger pigeon. The city, with its myriad of lights and life, was a canvas of beauty for Lao Shi. He found himself drawn to the side of a bridge overlooking the river. The view, a serene contrast to the day's energy, was something he cherished deeply, making it a point to absorb the beauty of the town. Eventually, even Jiu succumbed to slumber amidst their nocturnal exploration. It was nearly dawn when Lao Shi, with the sleeping Jiu, quietly made his way back to the inn, their night of reflection a subtle prelude to the challenges that awaited with the new day. The first light bathed the rooftops in a soft glow, casting long shadows on streets meticulously prepared for the day's grand event. The air was crisp and vibrant, charged with the collective excitement of spectators, competitors, and vendors, all converging on the city for the opening of the Roaring Tiger Tournament. The once quiet streets quickly transformed into bustling arteries of activity. Vendors called out to advertise their goods, offering everything from savory street food to exquisite martial arts equipment, their stalls adorned with colorful banners fluttering in the gentle morning breeze. The fragrance of steamed buns and spiced meats mingled with the earthy scent of tea, creating an intoxicating aroma that filled the air. Rather than confining the martial artists to a single arena, the tournament grounds were divided into 4 distinct fields, each more impressive and elaborate than the last. This setup reflected the Roaring Tiger Tournament's commitment to fairness, as competitors were grouped by age to ensure equitable matches. The categories were thoughtfully organized. One for children under 14, another for youths aged 14 to 18, a third for young adults between 18 and 24, and a final group open to participants of all ages without restriction. The tournament was set to unfold over nearly 2 weeks, commencing with the youngest bracket, allowing each age group to showcase their prowess and compete under conditions suited to their level of experience and skill. Lang and Ya, seasoned veterans of preliminaries, approached the chi and power assessments with casual confidence, breezing through without needing to unleash their full potential. Chao, in her first tournament appearance, easily surpassed the chi test. Her performance on the measuring stone, exceeding the minimum requirement threefold, caused a ripple of astonishment among the onlookers. The Roan brothers faced a sterner challenge, but ultimately succeeded, ensuring all 5 of Lauscher's disciples advanced to the competition stages. Fortunately, the tournament structure granted them a 3-day respite before their respective age categories were scheduled to begin. "How fortunate we are to have these 3 days," Chao remarked, her spirits high. "Fortune, you say?" Lauscher teased, casting an amused glance at Tao and Jiang. "Considering the narrow margin by which you two passed, this free time presents the perfect opportunity for some focused training outside the city." "Absolutely, Master," Tao agreed, though his enthusiasm dimmed under the knowing looks from Lang and Ya. They both had goosebumps and shook their heads. "Best of luck," Lang offered with a wry whisper as the brothers prepared to depart. "They're going to need it," Ya added, the memory of past training sessions sending a chill through him. "It surely can't be that daunting, right?" Chao asked, her concern palpable. Yet, the silence that met her question, along with the telling looks exchanged among her fellow disciples, spoke volumes. Their collective experience with Lauscher's gentle training sessions painted a vivid picture of the demanding path that lay ahead for Tao and Jiang. Rather than taking the day to unwind, Lang, Ya, and Chao dedicated themselves to their chi cultivation within the quiet confines of their rooms, punctuating their focused training with bouts of exercise. The hours slipped by uneventfully, but the absence of Lauscher and the Rong brothers cast a shadow of curiosity over the day. It wasn't until dinner that Lauscher reappeared, making an entrance that would be long remembered. He carried Tao and Jiang as if they were no more cumbersome than a pair of travel bags, navigating through the establishment to their table. The sight of him gently setting them down into their seats was almost comical, if not for the brothers' clear state of utter exhaustion. Exhausted was an understatement. Their appearance, clothes torn and adorned with patches of grass, hands trembling, spoke volumes of the day's rigor. A feast lay before them, yet the brothers were too spent to even contemplate lifting their chopsticks, let alone partaking in the meal. Their stomachs protested, but their bodies refused to cooperate. "You've outdone yourself again, Master," he sighed, his concern overriding his exasperation as he took it upon himself to feed Tao. The effort it took for the boy to chew was palpable, highlighting the intensity of their training. Lang, shaking his head with a mix of disbelief and brotherly care, mirrored Ya's actions, assisting Jiang with his meal. The solidarity among the disciples was a silver lining to their current plight. "Fear not, by nightfall I'll employ my chi healing technique. They'll be as lively as spring saplings by morning," Lauscher declared with a smug, satisfied air. However, his contentment flickered into annoyance at some urgent, unseen matter. "I must step out for a while, continue eating, and head to bed early. I may not return before you retire." With that, he briskly exited, leaving his disciples in a state of bemused concern. "You weren't exaggerating," Chow remarked, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and apprehension. She had been forewarned of Laosher's demanding training methods, but seeing the tangible results on Tao and Zhang brought home the reality of what harsh truly meant under Laosher's tutelage. Stepping outside into the evening air, Laosher's eyes caught sight of the hunter's sect woman once more. This time, the fleeting glimpse through the window solidified into certainty as he observed her from a distance, careful to remain unseen as she joined a group of women. Their lively and boisterous conversation was oddly entertaining to him, especially given the proximity of his long-anticipated retribution. "May I intrude for a moment, dear maidens?" Laosher inquired, his voice smooth and inviting. His appearance, polished and distinguished, made him seem as if sculpted from fine marble. "Oh my, how can we assist you?" One of the women responded, taken aback by his sudden appearance. "My apologies, but I find myself utterly captivated by the grace of this enchanting lady here. Might I be honored with your name?" Laosher directed his charm towards his unsuspecting target. "I am Mei Lian," she replied, her smile coy and demure. "If my presence so delights you, perhaps we might share some wine together," she suggested, her eyes alight with the prospect of complimentary libations and the intrigue of their newfound acquaintance. "Indeed, we shall. Let us seek out the finest establishment in town. A vision such as yourself deserves nothing less than the utmost splendor," he proclaimed, playing the part flawlessly. "I know just the place," Mei Lian declared, gesturing for her fellow sect members to follow. They looked on with a mix of envy and admiration, marveling at their sister's fortune in attracting such an illustrious suitor. The restaurant they entered in Nanjing boasted an opulence that rivaled the finest establishments in Hubei, its grand scale immediately apparent. As they were led to their table, Laosher spared no expense, selecting the most lavish items from the menu to ensure their dining experience was unparalleled. "Are you certain such extravagance won't deplete your purse?" May inquired, though her expression betrayed her delight in the lavish attention. "Why not seize the opportunity to make this day unforgettable?" Laosher responded with a charming smile, introducing himself as Xiaya for the evening. "Today we celebrate. And what might you be, Mr. Ye? A merchant, perhaps, or a renowned figure from distant lands?" May probed, her curiosity piqued. "A touch of both," Laosher replied smoothly, drawing upon tales from mangas to craft an intricate backstory. As their meal and drinks were served, the excellence of the cuisine was undeniable. Laosher drank with gusto, his request for wine replenishing their table without pause. May, thoroughly enchanted and slightly inebriated, was captivated. Feigning impatience with the service as part of his ruse, Laosher excused himself and descended the stairs. Once out of sight, he employed a high-level teleportation technique, vanishing to reappear in a secluded alley. Swiftly, he reverted to his more customary human guise, forgoing the chance to witness May's reaction upon being faced with the bill, a scene he vividly imagined with a sense of triumph. As Laosher made his way back to his inn, a victorious smirk played on his lips, savoring the success of his elaborate deception and the evening's unexpected turn of events. Meanwhile, May sat at the elegantly laid table, her eyes periodically drifting towards the entrance, expectantly waiting for Xia Ye's return. The ambience of the restaurant, once a backdrop to a delightful evening, began to shift as minutes turned into what felt like hours. The laughter and chatter of other patrons, once a merry symphony, now seemed to mock her solitude. A waiter approached, his steps measured, bearing the weight of the evening's indulgences on a silver tray. The bill, a tangible testament to the night's extravagance. Placing it gently beside her, his professional smile did little to mask the apprehension in his eyes. "Madam, your companion asked me to deliver this to you in his absence," he said, his voice a careful blend of courtesy and sympathy. May's anticipation quickly dissolved into confusion, then rapidly into disbelief as she scanned the contents of the bill. The numbers seemed to leap off the page, each digit a hammer strike to her expectations of the evening. The realization dawned, cold and unforgiving. Xiaoyu was not returning. The charming suitor who had promised an evening fit for a fairy had vanished, leaving her with nothing but a memory and the monumental task of settling the bill. Fury ignited within her, a fiery blend of embarrassment and anger. This must be some mistake, she protested, her voice rising above the ambient hum of the restaurant. He said he would take care of everything. The waiter, well versed in the dramas that often unfolded within these walls, could only offer a sympathetic shrug. I'm very sorry, madam, but the bill remains. As the reality of her situation settled in, May's thoughts raced, fury mingling with the sting of mortification from being both deceived and abandoned. Her initial admiration for Xiaya, now unmasked as nothing more than a cunning facade, cut deeply. What had begun as a night of promise and flirtation had culminated in a bitter lesson learned the hard way. May's pride, wounded by the betrayal and the public spectacle of her predicament, silently vowed never to fall for such trickery again. As she grappled with the waiter's insistent presence and the curious glances of onlookers, May's fury simmered, a potent reminder of the evening's unexpected turn. The tale of Xiaya and the abandoned bill would not be easily forgotten, destined to become a whispered story in the corners of the restaurant long after the night had ended. Chapter 12. Preparations. Just as their master had promised, Tao and Zheng woke up without a trace of pain in their bodies. Not only that, they found a new set of Jai neatly placed beside their beds. Instead of the muscle soreness they expected, they felt something entirely different. Their bodies were freshly cleansed, and they felt as light as a feather. Was it really necessary to knock them out too? Lang asked. I mean, they were so tired I bet they wouldn't have even felt what Master did to them. I knocked you out too, you brat, Laosha replied with a smirk. Bone restructuring is a rather painful process. It's better they slept through it. Why did you do it in the garden instead of on the bed? Ye asked, recalling his own experience when their master had used the same skill on him. And pay extra for cleaning the sheets? It was easier this way. Plus, the baths were already prepared for them there. You can't say I'm not efficient, Laosha bragged. And a sadist, Lang muttered quietly as he reached for his breakfast buns. Yeah, who overheard him, stifled a snicker as he leaned in for some food. Breakfast was prepared for them inside Laosha's room. While their master was harsh, he always ensured his disciples had enough to eat, and the quality of the food was top-notch. However, his purse was noticeably lighter. Today, the brothers will train with Lang, Laosha announced, prompting a sigh of relief from the two boys. Rolling his eyes, he continued, Chow, you will sell the millennial jadeite. Since you come from a good merchant family, I have high hopes you'll make a good sale. You can trust me, master, Chow said with a respectful bow. I'll make sure she and your money are safe, he added. Good. I have a few things to attend to. Try not to get into any trouble. That includes you three as well, Laosha said, turning to Lang. Yes, master, the boys responded in unison, straightening up. After breakfast, everyone set off to their tasks. Laosha followed up on a lead he'd gotten from Mu in one of their conversations. He needed a special material known as abyssal garnet. Not for jewelry, at least not in the traditional sense. Laosha stepped into the dimly lit shop, the scent of incense and polished wood greeting him as he crossed the threshold. The interior was a treasure trove of glittering gems, ornate jewelry, and finely crafted artifacts, all displayed with meticulous care. Behind the counter stood the merchant, a portly man with a shrewd look in his eye. Welcome, esteemed customer, the merchant greeted warmly, his eyes immediately assessing Laosha's refined appearance. You have a discerning eye, I can tell. What can I interest you in today? We have the finest selection of jewels, from radiant rubies to the clearest sapphires. Laosha returned the merchant's smile with a polite nod. I'm looking for something specific today, he said, his voice calm but purposeful. Abyssal garnets, unrefined if possible. The merchant's smile faltered slightly, though he quickly recovered. Abyssal garnets, you say? A rare and powerful choice. But surely, a man of your stature would appreciate the finest, most dazzling stones we have to offer. Perhaps you'd like to see our polished garnets first? With a practiced flourish, the merchant began laying out a selection of flawless, cut gemstones, each one more brilliant than the last. Their deep red hues caught the light, casting a mesmerizing glow across the room. It was an impressive display, one that had convinced many a buyer to part with more than they'd planned. Lauscher, however, remained unmoved. "I appreciate your collection," he said, holding up a hand to stop the merchant. "But it's the unrefined abyssal garnets I'm interested in. Small ones, to be exact." The merchant's face tightened with a hint of frustration. Realizing the lucrative sale he'd hoped for was slipping through his fingers. But not one to give up easily. He forced a grin and said, Of course. Abyssal garnets in their natural state are harder to come by, but I do have some in the back." He disappeared into the back of the shop, the sounds of rummaging and clinking stones filling the air. After a moment, he returned with a small, worn leather bag. Setting it on the counter, he opened it to reveal a collection of unrefined abyssal garnets, rough, uneven, but each exuding a deep, dark energy. Alongside these, he also placed a few of the finest cut garnets from his collection, hoping to tempt Lauscher into reconsidering. "Here we are," the merchant said, his tone a mix of optimism and resignation. "These are the unrefined abyssal garnets you asked for, along with a few of our finest cuts, just in case you change your mind. You won't find better quality anywhere else in Nanjing." Lauscher leaned in, inspecting the contents of the bag. The unrefined abyssal garnets varied in size and color, each with its own unique character and potent energy. He picked up a small, rough piece, feeling the raw power within it. Satisfied, he selected 5 small stones and 1 medium-sized garnet from the bag. "These will do," Lauscher said, placing the stones on the counter. "What's the price?" The merchant eyed the stones, calculating quickly. "For these," he began, trying to mask his disappointment, "I can offer them to you for just under a gold tael. It's an excellent deal, especially considering the rarity of such stones." Lauscher nodded, placing the payment on the counter. The merchant, though clearly wishing for a larger sale, couldn't help but appreciate the ease of the transaction. "Thank you for your business," the merchant said, bowing slightly. "If you ever find yourself in need of more refined stones, please remember us." Lauscher tucked the garnets into his sleeve, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "I will, good merchant," he replied, turning to leave the shop. As he stepped out into the bustling street, there was a lightness in his step, a happy skip in his beat, knowing he had exactly what he needed. The reason Lauscher sought unpolished gems rather than refined ones was rooted in his intent for crafting. While he had sent Chao off with a substantial collection of rare jadeite, he had kept the most potent stones for himself. Abyssal garnet, with its inherent qualities, was a valuable gem, but Lauscher's knowledge, acquired from the vast reservoir granted to him, revealed its true potential. With a touch of finesse, it could be fashioned into storage rings. The small size of a ring required the garnet to be equally modest in scale, as it needed to fit snugly within the jadeite setting. After securing his purchases, Lauscher found a secluded spot overlooking the bustling city below, where he could work undisturbed. The view offered a stark contrast to the intense focus he now summoned. Employing a specialized technique, Lauscher transformed the jadeite into a malleable, clay-like texture. With precision, he carefully inserted the small garnets into the softened jadeite, shaping each piece meticulously. He knew the exact dimensions of his disciple's fingers, allowing him to craft 5 rings that appeared unassuming yet held immense potential. Finally, he turned his attention to the remaining jadeite, into which he embedded the medium-sized garnet. This piece he fashioned into a bracelet designed for his own use. As he slipped it onto his wrist, he channeled his chi into the garnet, activating its latent properties. Thanks to his mastery of the immortal technique, even with these seemingly common materials, he managed to create a storage space the size of a small room, vastly superior to the one he had claimed from a past adversary. Now, he possessed 2 separate storage spaces. "These will make excellent gifts for their hard work," he mused, a satisfied smile tugging at his lips as he slipped the rings into his sleeve, ready to reward his disciples. Crafting the items took longer than Lauscher had anticipated. By the time he finished, the sun was already at its peak, casting a warm glow over the bustling city. He still needed to check in with the tournament organizers, as the age bracket for his students was approaching quickly, and he needed to confirm their battle assignments. Tao and Chao were scheduled for early morning matches, while the other 3 would fight in the early afternoon. These were merely the preliminaries, designed to weed out the weaker fighters, given the large number of participants. After collecting the wooden tags for each of his disciples, Lauscher decided to return to the tavern to meditate in earnest. Jiu, who had accompanied him, shared his sentiment. She loved meditating beside her master. The tavern room was comfortable, bathed in the gentle warmth of the spring sun. After enduring the harsh, cold winter in the mountains, this mild weather was a welcome change for both of them. As Lauscher settled into meditation, Jiu nestled comfortably on a pillow beside him, beginning her own breathing technique. She couldn't help but marvel at her master's seemingly endless reservoir of knowledge. It was still perplexing to her how the bunny master could devise technique after technique with such ease, never once consulting a book or scroll. Despite her lingering doubts, Jill had come to trust in her master's vast and unfathomable wisdom. Lang, followed by the Rome brothers, returned to the city after an intense training session. Although not nearly as grueling as their time with Lauscher, the session focused on evading Lang's relentless assaults. This exercise was invaluable, honing their awareness and improving their ability to dodge in the heat of real combat. Despite the numerous bruises Lang inflicted with his wooden sword, the brothers were grateful for the help from the senior disciple. "Let's treat ourselves to something sweet today," Lang announced, pulling a silver coin from his pouch. He had been frugal with his spending, amassing a considerable sum, but the enticing scent of sweets in the air was too tempting to resist. Tao and Jiang followed him with broad smiles, eager for a rare indulgence. Meanwhile, Yin Chao had successfully sold all the millennial jadeite their master had entrusted to them, earning nearly 400 gold taels. Fortunately, Lauscher had lent his storage ring to Chao, allowing her to securely store the money, an amount that would make any thief's mouth water. When they returned to the tavern, they saw Lauscher in his room, deep in meditation. Respecting his practice, they decided not to disturb him and instead headed downstairs for lunch before retreating to their own rooms for meditation. Night fell quickly, and the boys returned to the tavern, slightly drunk and giggling, their earlier training session a distant memory as they reveled in the evening's merriment. The next day, Lauscher led his disciples out of the city for one final training session before the tournament. Unlike previous sessions, he didn't push them too hard. Instead, he chose to observe each of their practices, offering pointers as needed. While he had faith in his students, the knowledge he had passed down was purely instructional, imparted through his own demonstrations and lectures, not written down. Lang and Ye had both reached a level of near perfection with their basic skills, requiring little guidance. However, Chao, Tao, and Jiang still made small mistakes that needed to be corrected. Lauscher was strict with his instructions, insisting on flawless execution with not even a millisecond of error in any move he taught. He aimed to ingrain these foundational techniques into their minds, just as he had done with Lang and Ye. Only when he was confident that the basics were mastered would he begin teaching them more advanced techniques. After a brief lunch break, they resumed their training, which continued until nightfall. "Tonight, eat as much as you like," Lauscher declared in the tavern, raising his cup in a toast. "Yeah," his disciples responded in unison, their voices filled with enthusiasm. The day of the preliminaries finally arrived, and each disciple donned the official attire of the Astral Moonpath sect. The soft blue and white garments, made from the finest materials, were a generous gift from the Jean family, symbolizing the pride and honor of their sect. Chapter 13 Differences. Lauscher adjusted his human disguise to reflect the colors of his sect, proudly displaying the insignia on his robes. With all 6 of them ready, they made their way to the tournament site. As a sect leader, Lauscher had a reserved seat among the other sect representatives, right in the front lines. After taking his seat, he waved at his disciples. Even though I know they're going to pass this test, I can't help but feel excited," he mused to himself. However, among the onlookers, he sensed the presence of many martial artists far beyond his own level, and the realization was anything but comforting. His unique technique allowed him to discern just how vast the difference in power was. Unassuming elders exuded such condensed chi that a shiver ran down his spine. Fortunately, his disguise, a product of an immortal technique, effectively concealed his true self, even from the keen eyes of these formidable beings. The tournament setup was on a scale far beyond anything the Jean family could have orchestrated. The battlefield was massive, accommodating for separate matches simultaneously. As the event unfolded, Chao and Tao quickly dispatched their opponents with just a few moves, making it seem almost effortless. The day progressed, and with the arrival of the afternoon groups, the rest of the disciples had their turn. Lang wasted no time, launching a single offensive move that sent his opponent flying out of bounds. Zhang, on the other hand, focused on evasion, skillfully dodging all attacks before delivering two well-timed punches that brought his adversary to the ground. Yeah, however, faced a much tougher opponent right from the start. His aura was already producing a mist around him, a clear indication of the intensity of the battle. His enemy gave him little breathing room, their spear clashing against Ya's sword in a shower of sparks. Known for his calm demeanor, Ya's eyes now blazed with determination. His opponent's technique was flawless, leaving no openings, and Yu was reluctant to reveal his full hand too soon. The opponent, a similarly aged boy in an earth-toned monk outfit, kept Yu at bay with relentless pressure. "Come on, Yu, you're better than this," Lang shouted, drawing a few disapproving glances from nearby spectators. "As if I don't know that," Yu muttered, jumping back to create some distance. "So be it," he sighed, ice crystals forming from his breath as chi surged into his sword arm and legs. A torrent of ice formed beneath his feet, propelling him forward at incredible speed. With a swift slash, he trapped the spear aimed at him in an ice beam. As he closed in on his shocked opponent, he delivered a powerful elbow strike, sending the martial artist flying out of bounds. For a few moments, the crowd fell silent, awestruck by Yu's display of skill. Then, as he bowed and calmly returned to the row of winners, the applause erupted. No matter how he looked at it, the Hunter Sect representative had clearly been cultivating for decades, if not longer. Lauscher, who had only begun his journey less than a year ago, knew he couldn't reach that level just yet, even with a cheat-like skill that accelerated his growth 5 to 10 times faster than normal. At the very least, he was confident that he could escape with his life if it came to that, thanks to skills known only to immortals. Now that he had drawn the ire of the Hunter Sect, he knew he had to tread carefully. It was clear that the Sect representative harbored a deep resentment for the loss, and while he likely wouldn't act on it directly, he might send others to handle the situation and preserve the Sect's reputation. This meant Lauscher had to be especially vigilant at night. "Gio, follow the Hunter Sect's representative using the stealth skill I taught you." Lauscher sent the mental command to Gio, and the blue bird immediately took off from his shoulder, seemingly dissolving into mist as she ascended. "On it, master," came Gio's reply in Lauscher's mind. As Lauscher finally approached his disciples, he noticed Yu sporting a wide grin, while Lang was pouting. "You got the only good fight," Lang lamented. "I suppose, but I had to reveal my hidden card. So now others will know my technique," Yu replied, though his words didn't quite match the satisfied smile on his face. "Let's just be happy that we all passed," Chao said, hugging the two boys. Lang let out an annoyed sigh, but the Rong brothers simply smiled. "Good work, everyone. Clean up, and let's head to dinner," Lauscher said, leading the way toward the tavern. That night, Gio returned to report to her master. He was clearly angry, but he accepted the defeat without resorting to anything dubious. The spear-wielding boy, however, was in deep trouble, forced to kneel with his hands raised. There was also a woman there, equally displeased, though she didn't say much. "Thanks for the report, Gio," Lauscher nodded, sighing in relief. It seemed the Hunter Sect wasn't as dishonorable as he had feared. The next 2 days passed without incident. To Lauscher's surprise, even Tao and Zhang won their matches, though they had to give everything they had, unlike Chao, Lang, or Yu. The first two disciples dominated their opponents with overwhelming superiority, while Chao, thanks to her unique physique and wind element, also had a distinct advantage over her adversaries. The fourth day dawned with a clear blue sky, and Lauscher felt confident that the tournament was already in their grasp. He had observed the other participants and couldn't see any talent that rivaled his own disciples. There were a few on par with the Hunter Sect disciple, but none seemed capable of matching the explosive power of Lang or Yu. Tao was set to start the day's first match against a young girl from the Azure Blade sect. As both of them wielded swords, the difference in their skills quickly became apparent. Tao fought hard to maintain his position, but it was clear that his stance was not yet fully developed. The short amount of time he had spent training in the way of the sword showed, and soon he was merely delaying the inevitable. Realizing his situation, Tao jumped back, dropped his sword, and bowed. "Your sword skills are enviable. Thank you," Tao said, cupping his fists in respect. "If you fix your stiff movements, you may reach higher goals," the girl replied, bowing back in mutual respect. While the others felt bad for Tao, Laosher nodded proudly. Even Tao himself wasn't upset or angry about losing to such a talented fighter. He saw it as a gauge of his progress, and deep inside, he was quietly pleased. After 2 more rounds, it was Chao's turn. Her opponent was a fist user from the Four Peaks Sect. Rather than testing Chao's movements, he charged in with all the chi he could muster. Chao was taken aback and tried to evade the onslaught with her wind movement technique, as her spear couldn't reach the swift attacker. The barrage lasted almost a minute, though it felt like hours to Chao. Both fighters exhausted their chi, and despite her best efforts, some attacks landed. Just as Chao was about to concede, her opponent suddenly collapsed, making her the winner. She muttered in disbelief, just as she was about to give up. "Medic," she called out, rushing to the boy. She quickly produced a pill from her garment and slipped it into his mouth. It was a medicine Laosher had prepared for situations involving internal injuries. "What do you think you're doing to him?" demanded a high-ranking representative from the Four Peaks Sect, landing beside her. "I gave him medicine. It's clear he has internal injuries," Chao replied, looking up, only to be met with the man's raised hand, ready to strike. Before the blow could land, Laosher intervened, catching the man's hand. "What do you think you're doing, trying to hit a disciple?" Laosher asked, his voice cold as ice. It was a tense situation, like a badger squaring off against a bear. Yet Laosher moved instinctively, without hesitation. The disciple from the Four Peaks Sect began coughing and opened his eyes, his gaze settling on Chao, who was leaning over him, holding his hand. A rush of emotions filled him as he turned quickly to his master. "Sensei, I received a blood recovery pill. She saved my life," he quickly explained, hoping to defuse the situation. The master's expression softened, and he gently gestured for Laosher to release his grip. Leaning down, he examined the boy's wrist. "Why did you enter the fight with internal injuries, Gahan?" he asked sternly. "I thought I could win before it became a problem," Gahan replied with a wry smile. "Thank you, and I'm sorry," the master said, bowing to Chao before lifting Gahan into his arms and carrying him to the approaching medical staff. "That was a good use of a pill," Laosher nodded toward Chao. "The life of another martial artist is always something to be preserved if possible. Even demonic cult disciples?" Chao asked with a cheeky grin. "That really depends on the person," Laosher replied with a smirk, "but let's put a pin in this conversation." With that, he began walking off the battlefield. Chao walked to the row of winners, even though she felt that it was wrong. If the boy didn't have any injuries, he would easily win the fight. In her mind, she promised to make up for it later. As the day progressed, Jiang drew the short straw, finding himself pitted against Lang. Fully aware of what was coming, Jiang charged in with a determined smile. Lang, recognizing his opponent's resolve, did the same. The fight was brief, ending with Jiang bruised and battered as he walked off the stage. When the medical staff approached to treat him, he simply shook his head and took his seat. "That Jiang has Lang's determination," Laosher remarked, nodding in approval. "Are you the representative of their sect?" asked the person seated next to him. "I am," Laosher nodded. "And you are?" "Call me Ringu, from the Tiger Blade sect," the man replied with a smile, offering a gentle bow. "I'm Laosher of the Astral Moon Path sect," Laosher responded, returning the bow politely. This representative seemed to possess a similar level of talent, but there was a nagging feeling in Laosher's mind. "Wait a minute, do you happen to have a disciple here, named Xiao Wang?" Laosher asked, his curiosity piqued. "I do indeed. He's made progress like no other. I dare say he's a genius," Ringa said proudly, pointing out the boy among the group of fighters. "Well, this is going to be interesting," Laosher remarked with a smile. "You know him?" Ringa asked, intrigued. "One might say that," Laosher replied. "My disciple Tian Lang and Xiao Wang had a bit of healthy competition back in their village. It's good to see that he's also grown considerably." Laosher nodded, though he added silently, "Let's hope he's matured too." Let's hope the two face off tomorrow, Ringus said, clapping his hands together happily. Lauscher offered a smile in return. If they do, Wong will have to learn just how wide the gap has grown between them, he thought to himself with a sigh. You closed out the day's fights with an overwhelming combo, forcing his opponent to surrender rather than endure further punishment. With the number of matches that could be held on such a massive stage, the fifth day was set to be the last of the junior tournament. On the final day of the tournament, Chow and the boys made sure to eat their fill, the air buzzing with anticipation. The Roan brothers chuckled as the trio nearly fought over the best bites. I really hope I'm not pitted against either of you, Chow said, glancing at Lang and Ya. Just reaching this point is a massive achievement, Chow, you replied with a reassuring smile. Seizing the moment, Lang snatched the last prawn from the plate in front of Ya. You little brat! You playfully smacked Lang on the head, sending the whole group into fits of laughter. Is that how you treat your elder disciple? Lang asked after swallowing his prize. Elder, my foot. I'm older and more talented. Anyone can see that, you retorted, wiping his mouth with an exaggerated air of nobility. For a moment, it seemed Lang might retaliate, but then both of them burst into laughter. Are they always like this? Tao asked. I only joined less than a week before you guys, so I can't really say, Chow replied, shaking her head with a smile. Lauscher descended the stairs with Jiu perched on his shoulder, smiling as he saw his disciples laughing together. A gentle smile crossed his lips as he leaned in. Good to see my disciples are enjoying themselves. Let's hope you'll still be laughing after the tournament, he said cheerfully. If we don't take first place, I'm going to make sure you all experience the B7 training method. The color drained from Lang and Ya's faces as they swallowed hard. We'll win, they shouted in unison, as if they were soldiers receiving orders. Good. I've placed quite a fortune on one of you winning, so don't make your master regret it. Lauscher walked away, letting his words sink in. What's the B7 training method? Zhang asked, but when no answer came, he hoped he would never have to find out. Lang kicked off the competition with a match against another sword user. Not giving his opponent a chance, he executed the blazing feather dance, sending his adversary flying in a fiery gust. Ya, too, dominated his match, outmaneuvering an opponent who tried to rely on speed. Ya simply froze the ground, making it too slippery to gain traction. When 4 sharp ice lances landed near his opponent, the disciple quickly conceded. Chow, however, finally met her match. She lacked the speed and training to go toe-to-toe with another spear user. Her opponent was from the Hunter Sect, a boy named Nei Lezu. After his victory, the Hunter Sect representative stood up and shot a smug look at Lauscher. Here, Lezu said, offering his hand to Chow and helping her up. I had to fight this hard to avenge my brother's loss. It was a good fight, Chow replied, dusting herself off and offering a respectful bow to the winner. Chow, already a relatively good-looking girl before her training, was now blossoming into a true beauty. It was clear that Lezu was blushing as he watched her walk off the field. Dang, that girl is going to become a magnet for men soon, Lauscher muttered, shaking his head. He couldn't help but feel a bit defeated, as he had no libido to speak of since his reincarnation, no matter how beautiful the women around him were. After 2 more matches, there was a break, as the upcoming fights would determine the top 3 spots. Lang and Ya sat in lotus position, replenishing their chi reserves, while Chow made her way to Tao and Jiang in the stands. You did well, Jiang noted as she sat down, his brother nodding in agreement. The next battle was one Lauscher couldn't miss. Xiao Wang from the Tiger Blade Sect versus Tian Lang from the Astral Moonpath Sect. I'm going to enjoy mopping the floor with you, Lang, Wang taunted, readying himself. Let's see how much you've improved, Lang replied, his tone equally taunting as he signaled with his free hand for Wang to come at him. As the gong sounded, Wang charged at Lang with a lightning-fast attack. His speed was on par with Lang's, and the 2 swords clashed fiercely. It was clear that Wang had put in serious effort to hone his skills. The fact that he had a lightning root surprised even Lauscher, but what was truly intriguing was that Lang didn't counterattack. He only dodged or blocked the incoming strikes. Wang's attacks came dangerously close, and a few even managed to scorch Lang's outfit with lightning. 34. Lang stated calmly after the seemingly endless assault. What? Wang asked, stepping back in confusion. I'll let you attack 34 times. The exact number of times you and your friends pummeled me, Lang said in a low voice. Do you remember what happened on the 35th time? Wang's eyes widened in realization, and he instinctively tried to defend himself. But Lang's attacks came from unpredictable angles, slashing his clothes and tearing into him with blazing intensity. Overwhelmed, Wang stumbled back and fell, feeling as though a demon had been unleashed in Lang's form. I give up, Wang cried, tossing his sword aside, not wanting to endure another round of cuts. Lang walked back to his seat in silence, unfazed by Yu's surprised expression. The Tiger Blade Sect representative watched in horror as the medics carried Wang off the field. I mean, no offense, but that felt personal, he remarked with a disgusted expression. Yeah, it kind of was, Laosha replied with a shrug. Let's just say Lang wanted to send a message. But all the cuts were superficial. If he really wanted to hurt Wang, he wouldn't be breathing right now. Ringa hesitantly nodded, pulling back slightly. He could tell that Lang had restrained himself, making sure not to inflict any lethal damage. But the fact that these two boys were once equal shook him. What kind of training had that Lang boy undergone? Wang was already a rare talent, someone who never missed a training session, yet now he had been toyed with by a boy of the same age. Ringa made a mental note not to underestimate the Astral Moonpath Sect. Next match, Hunter Sect Disciple Nei Lezu versus Astral Moonpath Sect Disciple Waya, the announcer shouted. Let's see what your eyes can do, Lezu said with a playful grin, spinning his spear in his hand. You defeated Sister Chow, so I hope you're ready for some gentlemanly retribution, Yu replied, taking his position. As the gong sounded, Yu immediately sent an ice lance from his sword, but Lezu, having watched Yu's previous battles, was ready for the attack and deflected it with ease. Lezu then leapt forward to close the gap, but he didn't anticipate that Yu would do the same. As it appeared that Yu was about to be pierced by the spear, his body suddenly shattered into ice, revealing it was only a decoy. Realizing too late that the initial attack was a diversion, Lezu turned just in time to see Yu emerging from the shadow of the lance. Their weapons clashed mere inches from Lezu's chest, and he had to channel a significant amount of chi to defend against Yu's surprise strike. The next few exchanges drained Lezu's chi rapidly, his hands trembling under the relentless weight of Yu's seemingly delicate but powerful attacks. In the end, Yu managed to disarm Lezu, sending his spear flying out of bounds before placing his sword near his opponent's chin. I had to use far more chi than I expected to push you, Lezu, Yu said with a smile, sheathing his sword and cupping his fist in respect. I had no chance from the start, Lezu admitted awkwardly, returning the gesture. Meanwhile, Lang had also finished his battle against a chakram user who had kept him on his toes throughout the fight. With the ranking matches concluded, the stage was set for the final battles. Lang and Yu would face off for first and second place, while Lezu would fight the chakram user for third. After a brief rest, the fight between Lezu and his opponent was quick, as Lang's earlier damage had left the chakram user too exhausted to mount a strong defense. And now, for the final battle, we have two disciples from the Astral Moon Path Sect, the organizer announced, prompting a loud roar of applause from the stands. Tian Lang versus Waya. It's been more than 6 months since we faced off in the last tournament, Lang said playfully, readying his sword. We both know it won't end the same way this time, Yu replied, gripping his own sword tightly. The tension between the two was almost palpable. The crowd fell so silent that the distant cawing of a raven could be heard. The organizer nearly forgot to strike the gong, but when he did, the two boys clashed with elemental intensity. Fire and ice collided, creating pockets of superheated steam. Lang was the first to strike, his body igniting in flames as he executed the blazing feather dance. His sword cut through the air, each swing leaving trails of fire in its wake. The heat was intense, the flames roaring around him as he pressed the attack. Yu responded in kind, his expression unchanging as he activated the Northern Dragon Claws. The air around him grew colder, and his sword began to emit a faint, icy mist. He moved with fluid grace, his sword clashing against Lang's with a sound that echoed across the fighting grounds. Each strike was calculated, every movement precise, as he aimed to counter Lang's fiery onslaught. The two swordsmen danced across the field, their blades meeting in a flurry of sparks and flames. Lang's blazing feather dance was aggressive, each strike designed to overwhelm and overpower. But Ye's northern dragon claws were just as formidable. With each swing of his sword, Ye created razor-sharp claws of ice that sliced through the air, countering Lang's fiery attacks with a chilling precision. The ground beneath their feet scorched and froze alternately, reflecting the intensity of their duel. The other disciples watched in awe, barely able to keep up with the speed and skill on display. Lang gritted his teeth, his muscles burning from the effort. He pushed harder, unleashing a torrent of flames that surged toward Ye. But Ye was ready. With a swift movement, Ye created a shield of ice with his sword, deflecting the flames before launching his own attack. He lunged forward, his sword surrounded by the ethereal claws of a dragon, aiming for Lang's shoulder. Lang barely dodged, feeling the icy claws graze his arm as he twisted away. He retaliated with a powerful downward slash, flames erupting from his blade as he brought it down on Ye. Ye blocked the strike with his sword, but the force of the impact sent a shockwave through his arms. The two stood locked in place for a moment, their swords pressed together, fire and ice clashing in a brilliant display of power. With a final burst of energy, both disciples broke away, leaping back to gain some distance. They stood opposite each other, breathing heavily, their bodies covered in a mix of sweat, soot, and frost. "You're stronger than last time," Lang admitted, a grin spreading across his face despite his exhaustion. Ye smirked, lowering his sword slightly. "You too, but it looks like we're still evenly matched." They both knew that neither had the upper hand. The battle had pushed them to their limits, and though they had fought fiercely, neither could overpower the other. Chao and the Rome brothers could barely keep up with the rapid movements of the fighters, their eyes wide as they watched the granite stage take heavy damage. Lauscher sighed. "No wonder the seamstresses of this world are well paid. Martial artists must go through clothes faster than they do swords," he mused, already picturing the expense of buying new sets in bulk. The intensity of the fight, though extreme for everyone else, was exactly what he expected from these two. They had many similar battles in the mountains. You had the advantage of gathering chi in the winter mountains, where cold chi was plentiful, while Lang had to rely on hot medicinal baths to develop his chi at a comparable rate. As for who would win, Lauscher didn't particularly care. He had already won his bet. "This is pointless," Lang admitted, panting. "How about we pour all of our remaining chi into one final attack?" "I like the way you think. Let's do it," Ye nodded. The final attack sent a shockwave across the field and into the stands, even startling some of the elders from other sections. When the mist settled, the judge hurried onto the field. "Is he still conscious?" Lang asked as he lay on the ground. The judge checked on Ye, who had already passed out. Nodding, he then helped Lang to his feet, raising his hand high into the air. "The winner is Tian Lang," he shouted. The crowd erupted in cheers, with many standing and clapping as fireworks painted the afternoon sky. Lang, barely able to stand, was swept off his feet by Chao, who had jumped down from the stands to embrace him. "Congratulations, elder brother," she exclaimed, hugging him before helping him stay upright. Lauscher, using his shadow thread movement, appeared beside Waya and gently picked him up. "You did well too. Now rest easy," he said softly, channeling some of his own chi into the boy to aid his recovery. Chapter 14, Interest and Expansion. It took a few minutes for Ye to wake, his face flushed with embarrassment as he quickly jumped out of his master's arms. "I want to congratulate you, Brother Lang," he said, straightening himself with a determined expression. "I might not win next time." "It was really close," Lang admitted with a humble grin. Soon after, the organizers called the two of them, along with Ei Lezu, to the stage as the top three contenders. The boys were met with approving nods and murmurs from the gathered audience, their achievements clear for all to see. An official from the tournament, a distinguished elder with a long, flowing beard and robes embroidered with the symbols of the Roaring Tiger tournament, approached them with a proud smile. He held a scroll in one hand and two intricately carved chests in the other. "Tian Lang of the Astral Moon Path Sect," the elder began, his voice resonating through the air. "You have displayed extraordinary skill and determination in this tournament. For emerging as the victor of the junior martial arts competition, you are hereby awarded 500 gold taels. The elder presented the chest to Lang, who accepted it with a deep bow. As he opened the chest, the gleaming gold coins within caught the light, along with a scroll fitted to its lid, reflecting the hard-earned victory of the young warrior. The weight of the coins felt substantial in his hands, a tangible reward for his efforts. Waya of the Astral Moon Path Sect, the elder continued, turning to Ya, for securing second place. You are awarded 100 gold taels. Another chest, smaller but no less significant, was handed to Ya. He accepted it with a polite nod, his expression calm, but inwardly filled with pride. Though he hadn't won first place, he knew his efforts had been recognized, and that was enough for him. And finally, Ni Lezu of the Hunter Sect, the elder nodded toward the spear user. Please accept this scroll for third place, along with my congratulations. Lezu bowed and accepted his token prize. While it wasn't gold, the scroll held significant value for him. Securing third place had redeemed his sect's honor, and that was worth more than any amount of money. May these rewards serve as a reminder of your achievements and inspire you to continue your path in martial arts. The elder concluded with a respectful bow. The crowd erupted in applause once more as the boys left the field with the elder's blessing. Laosher and the other disciples waited for Lang and Ya, and together they headed to the tavern. As they entered, the guests inside gave them a second wave of applause, acknowledging their victory. Once they settled down, Laosher reached into his sleeve, pulling out 5 jadeite storage rings, and placed one in front of each of his disciples. I want to gift you these storage rings as a symbol of my utmost pride in your achievements, he said with a smile, watching as the youth marveled at the precious gifts. As Laosher had learned from Jin Mu, such items were not only expensive but also rare, often passed down from the immortal realm and costing tens of thousands of gold. Master, I couldn't, Chao said in awe. As someone from a merchant family, she was acutely aware of the true value of such items. It's yours, Chao, to do with as you wish. Please don't make this embarrassing, Laosher replied, raising his hand in a gentle gesture of defense. The others also hesitated upon hearing Chao's words, but ultimately accepted the rings with gratitude. Afterward, the celebration continued well into the night, filled with laughter, stories, and the shared joy of victory. Later, Laosher sat in his room at night, gently petting the sleeping Jiao who nestled comfortably by his side. Well, I never expected things to go this smoothly, he mused, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. I made over 5,000 gold taels thanks to that bet. It's good that my sect has no prior records. Those fools underestimated my disciples, and it made my winnings soar. He leaned back, finally releasing his human disguise. His original form had grown significantly, no longer the small bunny he had once been. Spirit creatures like him and Jiao grew in size and power, and he could only wonder how much more his body would change as his strength increased. I wonder just how large this original body will grow, Laosher thought to himself. But even as time passes, martial artists don't forget things easily. Now that the sect's name is starting to spread, combined with mine, the Ebb and Fire sect might just try something. He frowned slightly, recalling the events that had led him to this point. It was he who had dealt a serious blow to one of their trading partners and killed a seasoned warrior in the process. Even though the man was a demonic cultivator, the fact that he had taken a life still gnawed at him. His mind was a jumble of thoughts, and he needed clarity. With a single leap, he was outside, and with another, he landed on the roof of the tavern. Laosher knew that things would inevitably become more complicated in the coming months, and he needed a plan. Instead of his usual meditation, he spent the entire evening perched atop the building, running through every possible bad scenario he could imagine, drawing on the knowledge from all the manga he had read in his previous life. As the morning sun rose and the streets began to fill with people, the energy of Nanjing's bustling crowd returned. The tournament was still ongoing, keeping the city lively and packed. Now that he had a considerable sum of money, Laosher knew he needed to equip himself properly. He planned to purchase a new and improved furnace for pill crafting, paper and cinnabar for making talismans, and even a full set of blacksmithing tools, anvil included. Despite all these expenses, he barely made a dent in his newfound wealth. Is this what it feels like to be rich again? He thought, smiling to himself as memories of his old life surfaced. where he could buy any manga, food, or entertainment he wanted. But strangely, he didn't miss any of those things. Ensuring he had everything he needed, Lauscher spent his entire morning in the market, occasionally leaning on a stall or asking about prices. Meanwhile, back at the tavern, you woke up and turned to see Lang already up, entranced by the chest full of gold. You playfully punched his shoulder. "Morning, champion," you greeted with a grin. "Lang? Sorry, brother," Lang replied, shaking himself out of his daze. "I was just thinking, this is too much money for me to handle. I want to give most of it to Master. Without him, I could never have dreamed of such an accomplishment. Only most." You teased. "Well, I want to send some home. My parents aren't poor, but we were never rich either. I figured they could." Lang's voice trailed off. "I understand," you nodded. "I grew up in a rich family, but I had friends back then who were in similar situations to yours." "You had friends?" Lang asked, but immediately regretted it as you slapped him on the back. "Do I look like someone who wouldn't have friends?" you asked, feigning hurt. "Many rich boys act like they're some big shot, but I actually liked having friends rather than underlings. In fact, one of our servants had a child who was a friend of mine. Her name was May." "Oh, you had a girlfriend?" Lang teased, grinning widely. "It wasn't like that, dummy. She was more like a sister than anything else," you explained, before slamming his pillow into Lang's face as he continued to make kissy faces. Lang snickered, then placed his chest full of gold into his ring. The space inside was akin to a bedside table, easily capable of holding all his belongings. "Where do you think Master got these rings?" you asked. "I talked to Chow, and these aren't just simple trinkets. Considering he might be an actual immortal master, I wouldn't be shocked if he had dozens of even better ones," Lang shrugged. He had accepted his master from the first day they met and never really questioned anything since. Others might call him naive, but for Lang, it was easy to put all his faith in one person. This single-minded focus allowed him to concentrate on training above all else. As Lang and you made their way downstairs, they spotted Chow, Tao, and Zhang already seated at a table. But as soon as they joined them, a small crowd began to gather around. The moment the onlookers saw Lang and Ye, the crowd shifted their attention, flocking toward the two boys. "Hey, does your master take in disciples?" one eager voice called out. "I can pay for tuition if needed," shouted another from the back. "Never mind those chumps. I'll prove my worth to you," a bulky boy said, pushing his way through the others with determination. "Calm down, everyone," Lang said, raising his arms in an attempt to restore order. "It's not up to us who gets in. You'll have to wait until Master Lauscher arrives and ask him yourself." "Yeah, so why don't you all act like proper martial artists and take a seat at one of the tables?" Chow added, standing up and gesturing toward the empty tables nearby. In total, about 15 eager hopefuls took their seats, some brimming with confidence while others shuffled nervously, glancing around. They all waited anxiously, stealing glances at the door, hoping to make a good impression. Lauscher finally arrived around noon, having kept both his own disciples and the newcomers waiting. As he entered, Lang waved to catch his attention, but before he could say anything, Lauscher was swarmed by the hopefuls. "Master!" Lang called out, but his voice was drowned in the excitement of the crowd. Lauscher, maintaining his calm and wise demeanor, raised a hand for silence. "I will speak with each and every one of you in my room, one by one. Chow, please get some paper and have them write down their names. Once you've done that, send them up one at a time." With that, Lauscher nodded to his disciples and ascended the stairs with a dignified air, carefully preserving his masterly facade. "All right," Chow said cheerfully, taking charge. "Line up, everyone." Lang and Ye leaned back in their chair, allowing a smug smile as they knew that soon their sect will rival all big sects in the region and more. Tao simply shook his head and whispered to his brother. If only they knew about the training method of Master, they wouldn't line up this eagerly, he said with a hint of sadness. Zhang couldn't help but snicker at the mental image as the eager disciples finally faced the challenges they will surely face. One by one, the hopeful youths rushed up to Lauscher's room. Hours passed, and by the end of the day, only 9 remained. The others had left, some with expressions of disappointment, others with anger or heartbreak. "It's more than I anticipated," he remarked, glancing up from his tea as the last few applicants trickled out. "Isn't that better, though?" Normal sects usually have hundreds of members, Chow pointed out, her tone light. True, but since when has ours been a normal sect? Zhang responded with a wry smile. The others nodded in agreement, smiles tugging at the corners of their lips. Lao Shi soon descended the stairs, signaling for everyone to gather around. Now that we have more disciples, we'll need to follow the system that most sects use, Lao Shi began. Lang, Ye, Chow, Jiang, and Tao, you are now closed-door disciples. The new members will be outdoor disciples. Anyone from the outdoor disciples can join the inner circle if they show serious progress and determination. He paused to let the information sink in before continuing. I'll arrange carriages and horses for you to travel to our current sect location. Travel with your brothers and sister, and train every day under either Lang or Ye. Master, what about you? Chow asked, concern in her voice. I have a few things to attend to, but don't worry. I'll be there waiting for you. Lao Shi reassured them with a smile, waving to his disciples as he left the tavern. True to his word, within hours, 4 carriages were stationed outside, already stocked with supplies for the journey. Ye, ever eager to take charge, leaped into the driver's seat of one of the carriages. That was quick, Ye noted, impressed by the efficiency. Those who know how to handle horses, take the driver's seat. The rest of you hop in the back. We got a long road ahead. With everyone following his lead, the disciples set off on their journey. Meanwhile, Lao Shi made his way to the market with a clear purpose in mind. He purchased paint, linen, and various building supplies, along with more garnets. He also retrieved another piece of jadeite to craft 3 more bracers. With the money he had, he spared no expense, buying pre-made roof tiles and proper hanging lanterns to elevate the sect's appearance. Once he had everything he needed, Lao Shi used his shadow thread movement skill, covering miles with each step. Though his chi ran out halfway, forcing him to rest overnight, he resumed his journey at dawn. Pushing himself to the limit, he finally arrived at the sect's small building complex. Exhausted, he took another day to fully recharge his chi before beginning the work ahead. What followed could only be described as a masterclass in skillful construction. Using the same techniques he had employed before, Lao Shi meticulously leveled the tops of all the nearby stone pillars, reinforcing them with earth-based skills to ensure stability. He then built bridges between the pillars, creating a network that connected the entire complex. Even with the use of immortal techniques, the work was grueling, requiring frequent breaks to consult his plans and recover his chi. Satisfied with the new layout, Lao Shi began removing the old roofs, replacing them with the elegant blue tiles he had purchased. He took great care with each building, ensuring the tiles were perfectly aligned and securely fastened. Once the roofing was complete, he moved on to the interiors, repainting and refining the living quarters, the chow hall, and the other buildings. He repaved the training field with sturdy stone, ensuring it could withstand the rigorous practice of his disciples. He also installed lanterns to light the pathways and furnished each room with comfortable beds, storage, and other necessities. Before, the sect had consisted of just one large building with a smaller adjacent structure for the 2 original disciples. There were 3 empty rooms and a modest training field within the garden. Now it was a sprawling complex. The main accommodation building was expanded to include 40 fully furnished rooms, with a large chow hall adjacent to it. On another pillar stood a dedicated building and garden for crafting, and on yet another, a massive, fully paved training field. He even constructed a steep stairway down the original pillar, sparing his disciples the arduous climb they had previously endured. I know you've done this before, Master, Jill remarked, her voice tinged with awe, but I can hardly believe all of this was built in under 2 weeks. Me neither, Lao Shi chuckled, though every muscle in his bunny body protested the effort. He could feel the strain of the immense task he had undertaken, but the sight of the completed sect filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction. If everything goes according to my plan, this entire area, Lao Shi said, sweeping his arm towards the multitude of towering pillars, will one day be part of our sect. He allowed his feathered companion, Jiu, to imagine the vast potential of the space, then added with a nod toward the chow hall, now, let's fill up the storage beneath the chow hall. With that, he made his way to the nearest city, purchasing rice, fresh vegetables, fish, and pork. Once he had stored everything inside his bracer, Lao Shi headed into the mountains to hunt, while Jiu set off to gather herbs. With the food storage now filled and kept cool by chi-infused ice to prevent melting, Lauscher finally allowed himself a full day to relax and meditate. His core was nearing the next bottleneck, and he could feel the pressure building. He knew it required careful attention, but advancing his cultivation wasn't his primary concern at the moment. By his estimation, his disciples could arrive any day now, and there was still one more task he needed to complete. After letting out a long sigh, Lauscher shifted into his human form once more. He pulled out the 15 empty books he had purchased earlier, placing them neatly on the table. Next, he set out an inkstone, ink rod, and brushes, preparing himself for the meticulous work ahead. Closing his eyes, he searched through his vast knowledge, seeking a comprehensive technique that could serve as a standard foundation for his disciples. The Golden Moon technique is a strong contender, Lauscher mused aloud. It's challenging to begin with, and can cause intense pain if performed incorrectly. Actually, that's perfectly my style. With a sly grin, he began painting the poses and writing out the detailed descriptions. His brush moved fluidly across the pages, capturing every nuance of the technique. That boy was right. You are a sadist, Jill remarked, shaking her head in mild exasperation. Lauscher didn't even glance up, his focus entirely on the task at hand. Perhaps, he muttered, unfazed by her comment, but it's for their own good. If everything goes according to my plan, this entire area, Lauscher said, sweeping his arm towards the multitude of towering pillars, will one day be part of our sect. He allowed his feathered companion, Jiu, to imagine the vast potential of the space, then added with a nod toward the chow hall. Now, let's fill up the storage beneath the chow hall. With that, he made his way to the nearest city, purchasing rice, fresh vegetables, fish, and pork. Once he had stored everything inside his bracer, Lauscher headed into the mountains to hunt, while Jiu set off to gather herbs. With the food storage now filled and kept cool by chi-infused ice to prevent melting, Lauscher finally allowed himself a full day to relax and meditate. His core was nearing the next bottleneck, and he could feel the pressure building. He knew it required careful attention, but advancing his cultivation wasn't his primary concern at the moment. By his estimation, his disciples could arrive any day now, and there was still one more task he needed to complete. After letting out a long sigh, Lauscher shifted into his human form once more. He pulled out the 15 empty books he had purchased earlier, placing them neatly on the table. Next, he set out an inkstone, ink rod, and brushes, preparing himself for the meticulous work ahead. Closing his eyes, he searched through his vast knowledge, seeking a comprehensive technique that could serve as a standard foundation for his disciples. The Golden Moon technique is a strong contender, Lauscher mused aloud. It's challenging to begin with, and can cause intense pain if performed incorrectly. Actually, that's perfectly my style. With a sly grin, he began painting the poses and writing out the detailed descriptions. His brush moved fluidly across the pages, capturing every nuance of the technique. That boy was right. You are a sadist, Jill remarked, shaking her head in mild exasperation. Lauscher didn't even glance up, his focus entirely on the task at hand. Perhaps, he muttered, unfazed by her comment, but it's for their own good. Chapter 15, Ill Intentions. In the shadowy halls of the Ebonfire cult's headquarters, the air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the low murmur of whispered conversations. The walls, adorned with dark tapestries and sinister symbols, seemed to absorb the light, making the vast chamber feel even more oppressive. At the center of this lair sat Zhao Xian, the head of the Zhao family and one of the elders of the cult, his expression cold and calculating. A slender figure clad in black robes approached him, bowing deeply before speaking. Elder Zhao, news has arrived from our spies in the southern regions. It seems that the one known as Lauscher, the so-called master who has been a thorn in our side, has established a sect of his own, the Astral Moon Path Sect. Zhao Xian's eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his intricately carved chair. Lauscher, the one who killed my brother, he muttered, his voice laced with venom. What else do you know? The sect is newly formed, but it's already gaining attention. It seems that this Lauscher is taking in disciples, and they've already begun to make a name for themselves. The spy continued, careful to keep his tone respectful. They recently won a significant victory in the Roaring Tiger tournament, which has brought them some renown. A slow, sinister grin spread across Zhao Xian's face. So, the little bunny thinks he can hide behind a Sect now? How amusing. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Send word to Zhao Feng. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear that his uncle's killer is within reach. The spy bowed again, acknowledging the order. Yes, Elder Zhao. I shall relay the message immediately. Zhao Xian waved a hand dismissively, and the spy quickly departed, leaving the elder to his thoughts. Meanwhile, in a different chamber of the cult stronghold, Zhao Feng was practicing his swordsmanship, his movements fluid and deadly. He had inherited his family's fierce temperament and was known for his ruthlessness in battle. As he executed a particularly vicious strike, a disciple entered the room, his face pale with urgency. Senior Zhao, the disciple said, panting slightly from his haste. I bring news from Elder Zhao. He has received information about Laosher, the one who killed your uncle. Zhao Feng froze mid-strike, his eyes widening with a mix of shock and delight. Slowly, a grin spread across his face, his eyes darkening with the thrill of anticipated vengeance. Where is he? Zhao Feng asked, his voice dangerously soft. He has established a sect, the Astral Moonpath Sect, in the southern regions. Elder Zhao has ordered a squad to investigate and, if possible, eliminate some of his disciples as punishment. The disciple replied, trembling slightly under Zhao Feng's intense gaze. Zhao Feng sheathed his sword with a flourish, his grin widening. Finally, the rabbit has come out of his hole, and now he'll pay for what he did. He turned to the disciple, his expression turning serious. Inform the squad that I'll be joining them. This is a personal matter. The disciple nodded quickly, bowing before retreating from the room. Zhao Feng stood in silence for a moment, savoring the prospect of avenging his uncle. Laosher, you won't escape this time, he whispered to himself, the promise of bloodshed making his heart race with excitement. Back in the dark chamber, Zhao Xian watched the flickering flames of the candles, his mind already envisioning the downfall of the Astral Moonpath Sect. He had no doubt that Zhao Feng would relish the chance to destroy the man who had humiliated their family. And with his spies keeping a close watch, it was only a matter of time before Laosher and his disciples would face the wrath of the Ebonfire cult. The journey to the mountainous region where the Astral Moonpath Sect was located began under clear skies, but the enthusiasm of the new disciples quickly gave way to complaints as they entered the misty terrain. This mist is so thick, I can barely see my own hands, one of the new disciples grumbled, squinting into the dense fog that surrounded them. Are we even on the right path? It feels like we've been wandering in circles. Another moaned, glancing around nervously at the seemingly endless gray shroud. Waya, walking at the front of the group with Tian Lang, chuckled softly. Don't worry, this is normal. The mist is part of a protective formation set up by Master Laosher. It's meant to disorient intruders. But how do you know where you're going? A third disciple asked, frustration evident in their voice. Master excluded us from the effects of the formation, Lang explained with a grin. Yet I can see the path clearly. Just stick close to us, and you'll be fine. The new disciples exchanged uneasy glances but followed obediently, trusting their senior brothers to lead the way. Despite their efforts to stay close, the mist made the journey slow and tiresome. Every step felt like it was taking them deeper into an endless gray void. My legs are killing me, one of the newer recruits muttered under his breath, dragging his feet as the path grew steeper. How much further? It's not far now, you assured him, though he couldn't help but sympathize. The path up the mountain was challenging, even for those accustomed to it. 3 days of arduous travel passed, with the group trudging steadily uphill, the mist clinging to them like a second skin. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath their feet became rockier as they neared the central pillar where the sect was located. Finally, as they approached the base of the central pillar, Lang and you spotted something new, a steep stairway carved into the rock. Hey, look at that, Lang exclaimed, pointing at the stairway. We didn't have this last time. Ya's eyes widened in surprise. You're right, last time, we had to climb the cliffs by hand. The new disciples looked relieved. Thank the heavens, one sighed. I thought we'd have to scale those cliffs. These stairs will be tough, but at least they're safer. Don't celebrate just yet, Chow warned with a playful smile. There are probably hundreds of steps to the top. The new disciples groaned collectively, but the thought of a proper stairway was enough to keep their spirits up. They began the climb, each step feeling heavier as they ascended. The mist clung to them, obscuring the view beyond the next step, but the promise of reaching the top kept them moving. As they climbed, Lang and Yu led the way, offering encouragement to the others. "Come on, just a few more steps," Lang called back, his voice full of energy. "Don't stop now," Yu added. "We're almost there." By the time they reached the final step, the new disciples were winded and drenched in sweat. They paused to catch their breath, hands on their knees, but as they emerged from the mist, gasps of awe replaced their fatigue. Before them was not the small outpost that Lang and Yu remembered, but a sprawling complex of beautifully crafted buildings, connected by elegant bridges that spanned the stone pillars. The roofs were adorned with gleaming blue tiles, and intricate lanterns hung along the paths, casting a warm, welcoming glow. The training field was now fully paved, and off in the distance, a large garden dedicated to crafting could be seen, surrounded by well-tended greenery. "By the heavens," Chow whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "This is incredible. It's like a whole city in the sky," Jiang murmured, unable to tear his gaze away from the sight. Lang and Yu were equally stunned. They remembered the simple buildings and the rough training ground. But what stood before them now was a magnificent hub of activity and beauty. The Sect had transformed into something far grander than they had ever imagined. "I can't believe this," Lang breathed, a grin spreading across his face. "Master really outdid himself." Yu nodded, equally impressed. "I knew he was working on something, but this is beyond anything I expected." The new disciples, who had been struggling just moments before, were now filled with renewed energy. The sight of their new home, a place so majestic and grand, filled them with pride and excitement. "This is our sect," one of them said, almost in disbelief. "This is where we'll train?" Lang and Yu exchanged looks of pride and satisfaction. "Welcome to the Astral Moonpath Sect," Lang said, his voice filled with pride. "This is where your journey truly begins." The group moved forward, crossing the bridge toward the central building where they knew Laosher would be waiting. As they walked, the new disciples couldn't stop talking about the breathtaking view and the sense of awe that came with it. "This was worth every step," one of them said, grinning despite his exhaustion. As they approached the central building, the doors opened, and Laosher stepped out to greet them. His expression was calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes as he looked over his disciples. "Welcome back," Laosher said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a master who had prepared a worthy home for his students. "I see you found your way here." The disciples, old and new, bowed deeply to their master, their hearts swelling with gratitude and respect. "We did, Master," Yu said, speaking for the group, "and we're ready to continue our training." The new disciples sat on the ground, catching their breath after the exhausting climb. The mist still swirled lazily below them, but the view of the expansive Sect compound was enough to invigorate even the most tired among them. Laughter and murmurs of disbelief filled the air as they took in the grandeur of their new home. Laosher, standing by the edge of the cliff, watched them with a satisfied smile before turning and beckoning Lang and Yu to his side. The two senior disciples approached, their faces still etched with confusion and wonder. "Master," Yu began, eyes wide as he gazed over the vast, elegant complex. "Just how in the world did you do this?" Laosher grinned, clearly enjoying the awe on his disciples' faces. "I may or may not have pulled a few buildings out of my storage bracelets," he said with a cheeky smile. "No big deal, really." Lang's eyes lit up with excitement. "You pulled these buildings out of a storage bracelet?" he yelled, unable to contain his amazement. "No way," Chow muttered under her breath from a few paces away, her brow furrowed in disbelief. She had heard of storage rings and bracelets that could hold a room's worth of items, but buildings? That was beyond even the most luxurious storage items she knew of, something reserved for emperors or the highest-ranking sect elders. The price of such an item would be astronomical, possibly beyond comprehension. Laosher, ever the strategist, noticed Chow's doubt and allowed a sly smile to creep across his face. In truth, he didn't possess any such miraculous storage item, but letting his disciples' imaginations run wild wasn't such a bad thing. Their awe and reverence were useful tools to inspire them and set their aspirations high. For now, the mystery would serve him well. After letting everyone rest for half an hour, Lauscher clapped his hands, calling Lang and Yi to gather the others. All right, it's time to get settled. Lead everyone to the new disciple residence, he instructed. The new disciples, still rubbing sore muscles, followed Lang and Yi toward the newly constructed residence. As they approached, the disciples stared in awe at the imposing building. It towered above them with 5 floors of polished wood and stone, each level connected by intricately carved railings. The windows were lined with dark, weather-resistant shutters, and the roof was capped with gleaming blue tiles that shimmered in the sunlight. Everyone, pick a room, Lang said, gesturing toward the doors. Each room has 1 bed and space for your belongings. Get comfortable. As the disciples entered, they marveled at the coziness of the rooms. Each had a large, well-insulated bed, soft to the touch and warmed by thick blankets. The walls were sturdy, and the floors were polished, giving the rooms an unexpected warmth. Despite the building's size, it felt comfortable and inviting. There was enough room for them to store their clothes and personal items, and the simple yet elegant decor made the rooms feel more like a home than a barracks. Every floor also featured a large stove in the common areas to heat the rooms during cold nights, making the space perfect for the mountain climate. On each bed, the disciples found 2 sets of training clothes neatly folded. The material was durable yet comfortable, built to withstand the rigors of training while providing ease of movement. The garments weren't extravagant, but their practicality made them all the more valuable. As the disciples settled into their rooms, taking in the scent of fresh linen and the comfort of the space, a new sensation reached their noses, something even more divine than the comfortable beds. The smell of freshly roasted meat wafted through the halls, making their stomachs growl in unison. Food, a disciple cried, quickly changing into their new training clothes before rushing out of their room. The others followed suit, eager to taste something more than dry rations. They descended to the large Shao Hall, where 2 enormous boars roasted over a massive grill pit. The meat sizzled as juices dripped onto the fire, and the scent of roasting pork filled the entire room. Long tables had already been set with freshly cooked vegetables, steaming rice, and an array of sauces that glistened in the light of the fire. Lauscher stood near the head of the chow hall, clapping his hands to get their attention. Let me welcome you once again to the Astral Moon Path Sect, my disciples. His voice boomed with pride as he gestured toward the feast before them. Now let the feast begin. Above the tables, Gio swooped down, hovering just above the heads of the disciples. Line up, she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. There will be plenty for everyone, even enough for seconds. No need to rush. The disciples eagerly followed Gio's orders, forming an orderly line as they approached the boars. They took turns carving generous portions of meat for themselves, piling their plates high with vegetables and rice before settling down at the long wooden tables. Soon, the chow hall was alive with the sounds of laughter and conversation, the earlier exhaustion forgotten as they devoured the delicious food. Lang and Yi sat together with the others, happily eating alongside their fellow disciples. This is amazing, one of the new disciples said between bites, his face full of contentment. I've never eaten like this before. As the disciples reveled in their meal, Lauscher quietly slipped out of the hall, a small smile on his face. Gio followed him as they made their way toward the main building. He had done all the preparations beforehand as he saw the disciples approaching, though he knew that this could not be all the time. Aren't you going to eat? Lauscher asked, casting a glance at his feathered companion. Gio settled comfortably on her perch near his shoulder. I already had my fill, she replied, her tone content. Lauscher chuckled, nodding as they entered his private chambers. He walked over to a large desk where stacks of paper and ledgers awaited his attention. With a sigh, he sat down and began pulling them into neat piles. All right then, he said, his voice taking on a businesslike tone. Help me organize our expenses, Gio. Let's make a precise calculation of our spending for the next 6 months. Planning ahead? Aren't you in need of rest too? Gio teased lightly, but she fluttered down to help, her sharp eyes scanning the papers as Lauscher began to tally the cost of their recent ventures. Though the sect had grown beyond even his expectations, Lauscher knew there was still much work to be done. The sun had barely risen over the peaks of the mountains when Lauscher gathered his disciples in the main courtyard. The morning mist still clung to the air, giving the scene an ethereal quality. Lauscher stood before his disciples, holding a stack of freshly bound books, each one filled with the basics of the Golden Moon technique, carefully crafted over the past few days. These books contain the foundation of your training, Lauscher said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. He handed a book to each of the new disciples, who accepted them with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Study them diligently and practice what is written. Lang, yeah, he called, turning to his senior disciples. Take Xiao, Tao, and Jiang to the training grounds near the main building. Begin your morning drills there. Lang and Ye both nodded, understanding that Lauscher was establishing a distinction between the outer disciples, who would begin with the basics, and the inner disciples, who were ready for more advanced training. The 5 senior disciples moved to the designated training grounds, leaving the newer ones to their studies. Lauscher watched them go, a thoughtful expression on his face. Ever since they had left the mountain for the tournament, he had only managed to gather his strength in short bursts. The tournament had been a stark reminder of his current limitations. Despite his knowledge and skills, he could easily be overwhelmed by the sheer power of the masters and elders he had encountered. He knew he needed to grow stronger, and soon, but cultivation wasn't something that could be rushed. The process required time, patience, and in some cases, rare pills or legendary items that he didn't have at his disposal. What he did possess, however, was access to the best techniques in the world. With a determined resolve, Lauscher withdrew to his private quarters. He sat cross-legged in his bunny form, feeling the familiar pull of the bottleneck that had been looming over him for some time. Popping a spirit-gathering pill into his mouth, he closed himself off from the world, focusing entirely on his cultivation. The body-tempering stage was grueling. Every muscle in his small form felt as though it was being torn apart and rebuilt, the intense pressure threatening to crush him at every turn. His muscles burned as he channeled his qi, forcing his body to endure the transformation. For 5 days, Lauscher remained in his secluded chamber, his only company the steady rhythm of his breathing and the internal battle waging within him. He attacked his own body with his qi, healing it and tempering it with each cycle, pushing himself to the very brink of his endurance. The pain was excruciating, but he didn't waver. He knew that breaking through this bottleneck would bring him one step closer to the power he needed to protect his disciples and achieve his goals. On the 6th day, a massive surge of energy erupted from Lauscher's room, the force of it sending a ripple through the entire sect. Lauscher felt an immense relief as the bottleneck shattered, the overwhelming pressure that had burdened him for so long lifting from his body. For the first time in days, he took a deep breath, feeling as though his muscles had been made of lead until now. With his breakthrough, he felt a newfound strength coursing through his veins, as if he could leap to the moon and back, though he had no intention of testing that theory just yet. As Lauscher stretched, testing the limits of his newfound power, the morning bells chimed softly from the chow hall, signaling that breakfast would soon be ready. Elsewhere in the sect, Lang was already up, his focus entirely on his training. He had chosen to practice on the massive training field at the edge of the sect, far from the others. He didn't want to disturb anyone with the intensity of his exercises. Every movement he made conjured flames, the heat licking at the air as he pushed himself to master the blazing feather dance. The tiles on the training field were reinforced by a formation, allowing them to withstand the destructive force of Lang's fire techniques. His body burned with the exertion, both from the physical strain and the searing heat of his own qi. But he welcomed the pain. It was a reminder of his progress, a testament to his dedication to becoming the strongest disciple. As he practiced, Lang couldn't help but think about Ye. Up here in the mountains, Ye's ability to gather qi would be greatly enhanced, and Lang knew his fellow disciple would likely surpass him in no time if he didn't push himself harder. The thought spurred him on, driving him to give everything he had in each movement. By the time the small bells chimed in the chow hall, signaling the approach of breakfast, Lang was drenched in sweat. He smiled to himself, satisfied with the progress he had made. Packing up his training clothes, he headed to the bathhouse for a quick soak before the meal. Gio had established a set of rules for the Chow Hall that Lang appreciated. Every 2 days, a new pair of disciples was responsible for waking early and preparing breakfast for the entire sect. It was a valuable skill, one that Gio believed all the disciples should learn. Despite the simplicity of the meals compared to their first feast, the experience of cooking and serving each other brought the group closer together. Gio herself was always present in the kitchen, guiding the disciples and helping with the cooking. She had learned her culinary skills from both Lao Shi and the skilled cooks of the Jin family, and she took pride in ensuring that each meal was prepared with care. Today's breakfast would be no exception. As Lang entered the Chow Hall, the smell of freshly cooked rice and simmering broth greeted him. The other disciples were already lining up, groaning painfully as the training manual Lao Shi had given them was nothing short of torture. Lang joined them, nodding knowingly as he was no stranger to their master's unconventional training methods. As Lao Shi stood up, he stretched his body, feeling the pleasant release of tension from his muscles. He glanced around the room, noting the absence of Gio. His keen senses picked up a strong, musky animal scent in the air, his own. A faint smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth as he realized how much he had been sweating during the intense days of cultivation. Despite the intense effort, his body didn't seem to lack moisture, but the odor was undeniable. With a slight shake of his head, Lao Shi decided it was time to clean up. He made his way to the bathhouse, where the cool morning air was already beginning to warm. The small building was constructed of smooth stone, with steam gently rising from the roof, promising warmth within. Lao Shi entered, and with a swift, practiced motion, he used his fire techniques to heat the water, the surface of the bath quickly becoming a rolling boil before he allowed it to settle into a comfortable temperature. He slipped into the warm water, sighing deeply as the heat soaked into his fur, relaxing his muscles. "Ah, almost forgot how much I like hot baths," he murmured to himself, letting his long ears droop down as he reclined. The soothing warmth of the bath was a luxury he hadn't indulged in during his days of intense training. As the water began to cool, Lao Shi reached for the soap, a rough, unscented brick that was nothing like the fragrant, silky soaps he remembered from his previous life. He frowned slightly as he worked up a lather, the texture of the soap gritty against his fur. "I think I could make some scented soap too," he mused aloud, examining the brick in his paws. With the evolution of his form, he had gained opposable thumbs even in his bunny form, allowing him to handle items with ease. It was a small but significant change, finally not needing him to use chi to grab things in his animal form. He scrubbed his fur thoroughly, washing away the grime and sweat of the past days, feeling the cool air against his freshly cleaned fur as he stepped out of the bath. Hearing footsteps approaching, Lao Shi quickly changed into his human form and dried himself off, wrapping a towel around his waist just as the door to the bathhouse opened. "Master!" He called out excitedly as he saw Lao Shi exit the bathhouse, his face alight with enthusiasm. "Lang told me that you managed to break through." Lao Shi nodded with a satisfied smile. "Yes, it was something I needed to do now. Unfortunately, I'm still far from my original strength, but I'm growing rapidly," he replied, his tone both humble and confident. "I expected nothing less of our sect master," Chow added, smiling warmly as she approached with the Rong brothers in tow. Lao Shi waved them forward, stepping aside to let them into the bathhouse. "Don't let me hold you back. Go on, take a bath, and then start your training," he instructed, watching as they eagerly entered the bathhouse to wash up. The day proceeded smoothly. Lao Shi spent his time checking on the new disciples, offering pointers to those who struggled with their forms or techniques. His disciples were almost spitting blood from their mouths as their bodies moved with the technique. While it was a hard training, some already started to do it right, saving them from the backlash of doing it wrong. Later, Lao Shi made his way to the larger training field where Lang was hard at work. The boy had progressed significantly, his mastery of the blazing feather dance nearly complete. With each movement, Lang conjured flames that danced in perfect harmony with his body, the intense heat tempered by the formation-protected tiles of the training ground. Lao Shi observed quietly, a smile tugging at his lips. Lang's progress was impressive, and it was clear that he would soon need an advanced technique to continue his growth. Satisfied with what he had seen, Lauscher turned and made his way back to his office. With all the paperwork completed and his bottleneck shattered, Lauscher felt a deep sense of contentment. He sat at his desk, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the window and casting a warm glow over the room. For a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the satisfaction of his accomplishments. But then, an idea struck him. Why not celebrate? With a grin, he decided to indulge in something he hadn't accounted for in his meticulous plans: a drink. He grabbed a handful of silver coins and headed into the nearest town, where he purchased a small barrel of rice wine. Returning to the Sect with his prize, Lauscher wasted no time in uncorking the barrel. He poured himself a cup of the fragrant liquid and took a sip, savoring the warm, smooth flavor. Though his body's natural resistance to alcohol prevented him from truly getting drunk, he could still lower his defenses enough to enjoy a light buzz. As the warmth of the wine spread through him, Lauscher leaned back, his thoughts drifting to the future of his sect. He envisioned the challenges that lay ahead, not just in the coming years, but in the decades to come. What obstacles would they face on their path to ascend to higher planes of existence? Could they one day reach the land of immortals, or even the realm of gods? The thought brought a chuckle to his lips. They were lofty dreams, but dreams worth pursuing. As the day progressed, Lauscher continued to sip from his cup, the barrel slowly but surely emptying. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the courtyard as evening fell. By the time the last drop of rice wine had been consumed, the entire barrel was empty, and Lauscher felt a rare sense of contented weariness. Gio fluttered into the room, her expression stern as she took in the sight of the empty barrel. "Master, really?" she scolded, her voice filled with exasperation. "You've been drinking all day?" Lauscher offered a sheepish grin, shrugging lightly. "It was a small celebration, Gio. No harm done. No harm done. Except to that barrel," Gio huffed, shaking her head. Lauscher chuckled, though he knew she was right. "Fair enough," he conceded, pushing the empty barrel aside. "I'll be more responsible next time." Gio sighed, but her stern expression softened. With that, she settled into her usual perch, while Lauscher returned to his usual meditation spot. Though he didn't need sleep like his disciples, meditation allowed him to refocus and prepare for the challenges ahead. As he closed his eyes and began to channel his chi, he felt the familiar flow of energy moving through his body, ready to embark on the next stage of his cultivation, the acupoint opening stage. The mountains surrounding the astral moon path sect were shrouded in an impenetrable mist, an eerie silence blanketing the landscape. Zhao Feng stood at the base of one of the many towering pillars, his expression twisted in frustration. He had led his elite team from the Ebonfire sect to this remote region with one purpose in mind: make Lauscher curse the day he crossed path with their sect. But the cursed mist had thwarted their every move. "Master Feng, this mist, it's unnatural," one of the younger disciples muttered, glancing nervously at the swirling fog. "We've been wandering in circles for days." "It's a formation," another, older disciple hissed, his voice edged with irritation. "A powerful one at that. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing." Zhao Feng's eyes narrowed. "A formation, you say?" The older disciple nodded, pulling a massive scroll from within his robes. "This is the scroll of Heaven's Rend," he said, holding it up for the others to see. "It's capable of breaking any formation, even those at the peak level. We'll be out of here in no time." The other disciples watched with a mix of hope and apprehension as the older disciple unfurled the scroll. The parchment was covered in intricate symbols and glowing runes, and as he activated it, the symbols began to pulse with a faint light. The disciple chanted under his breath, focusing all his energy into the scroll. But just as the scroll's power was about to peak, something went terribly wrong. The symbols on the scroll suddenly flickered and then burst into a pale blue flame. The flame raced along the parchment, consuming it in an instant before latching onto the disciple's left arm. The disciple screamed in agony as the flames devoured his arm, the blue fire burning with a cold intensity that was far more terrifying than any ordinary flame. The other disciples recoiled in horror as the fire reduced the man's arm to dust in seconds, leaving behind only charred remnants. Zhao Feng's expression darkened, his fury barely contained. "You fool," he spat, glaring at the injured disciple who had fallen to his knees, clutching the stump where his arm had once been. You said this scroll could break any formation. It should have, the disciple gasped, his voice weak from pain and shock. This formation, it's beyond anything I've encountered. Fong clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with anger. I don't care what it takes. We are not leaving until we find that sect and burn it to the ground. The elite team, now weary and shaken, exchanged uneasy glances. They had been wandering through the mist for 2 weeks, and morale was at an all-time low. Even the high-level disciple who had come as reassurance was beginning to lose his composure, his once calm demeanor fraying at the edges. We need to keep moving, Fong ordered, his voice a harsh whisper. We'll find a way out of this cursed fog. The following day, as the team continued their seemingly endless trek, they stumbled upon a massive stone pillar that loomed out of the mist like a dark monolith. Feng's eyes gleamed with renewed determination. We climb, he declared, not waiting for any descent. Whatever is at the top, it's better than this endless mist. The disciples nodded, too exhausted and desperate to argue. They began their ascent, the climb grueling and slow. The pillar was tall, its surface rough and jagged, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this might be their only way out. Hours passed, and the climb tested their endurance to the limit. The air grew thinner, and their muscles ached with fatigue, but the thought of finally escaping the mist kept them going. As they neared the top, the first rays of dawn began to pierce the darkness, casting a crimson glow across the sky. Finally, they reached the summit, and the mist parted beneath them like a veil. Gasping for breath, the disciples pulled themselves up onto the flat surface, their eyes widening in disbelief. Before them was the astral moon path Sect, its buildings gleaming in the dawn light. The Sect was a sight to behold, a sprawling complex of structures connected by elegant bridges and flanked by towering stone pillars. The entire area was serene and beautiful, a stark contrast to the treacherous mist below. On the far edge of the massive training field, a lone figure was practicing, his movements fluid and precise. It was Tian Lang, his sword flashing in the morning light as he executed the blazing feather dance with practiced ease. The flames that accompanied his technique danced around him, their glow reflecting off the tiles of the training field. Zhao Feng's lips curled into a cold smile as he watched the boy. "There's our target," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Perfect. Killing him will send a message to Lao Shi that the Ebon Fire Sect is not to be trifled with." One of the disciples shifted nervously. "Are you sure we should attack now, Master Feng? That boy, he looks strong." "Strength means nothing when faced with the Ebon Fire Spear," Feng retorted, pulling out the legendary weapon from within his robes. The spear's blackened shaft gleamed with a sinister energy, and the tip was engulfed in a dark, flickering flame. The sight of the weapon silenced any further objections. The Ebon Fire Spear was feared throughout the nearby sect, known for its ability to kill anyone below the peak skill level with a single strike. It was a weapon of absolute destruction, and Feng intended to use it to make an example out of the Astral Moonpath sect. "We'll ambush him," Feng continued, his eyes locked on Lang. "Wait for my signal. When I give the word, we strike together. No mercy." The disciples nodded, their faces grim as they prepared for the ambush. The mist had been a nightmare, but now that they had found their target, they were determined to make the most of this opportunity. The sky above was a deep crimson, the sun just beginning to rise, casting an ominous light over the scene.